So I set myself a little project of how close an emulation of the SH-101 could I achieve using Ableton Live 12 and the analog synth within Ableton. The answer is there are compromises, of course. There are compromises within the control of the instrument, limited by the number of macros you have in Ableton. There are some compromises in the functionality you can have, and of course in the sound as well. We don't have a Roland filter in here, but you can create a very nice instrument, a very nice bass instrument, a mono synth. And let's have a quick listen, and then I'll show you how the rack works, and finally, if you're interested as always, how you can put this rack together. So here you can see the controls of the SH-101. You can see we've got plenty of controls, and this was one of the limiting factors. If we go back to the rack, have a look at the rack. This is one of the limiting factors in building this rack, that we only have 16 macros and somehow we have to get all those controls in. Well, we couldn't get them all in. There are some compromises. Noise I had to leave out. I also had to leave out modulation of pitch, the pitch modulation, some control of the envelope using LFO, those things. So there were compromises within the controls available, but we still have a good selection. We have here filter frequency, resonance, we have control of the LFO shape. In fact, by using, we just open this up a second, by using analog we actually have some additional LFOs. Here's some additional LFO shapes. If we click on here, we have, well, I can show you here, we have a sine which the SH-101 didn't have. We have a couple of noise. So we kind of win and lose a little bit here, but as I say, we have control over the LFO shape. We have control over the LFO rate, control over the filter, control over the attack, decay, sustain and release for a combined control of the filter envelope and the amp envelope as well. So we have those. We have 2 octaves. If we turn this off, we have 2 octaves for our sub oscillator. In fact, let's have a look what we have here. We have the pulse, which we can mix with saw, and the sub oscillator, like on the SH-101. Let's remove those for a second. We have on a sub oscillator two octaves we can drop the square wave down by. It's a square wave here. Now the SH-101 also had a pulse option for the -2 position. We don't have that here. I've had to compromise that as well, but we still have the sub oscillator. We have the control over filter envelope, and we have control over the VCF, the filter keyboard position. So if we adjust this, the notes lower, if we increase this, the notes at the lower end, the octaves C0, C1 or C2, they will have a more damped tone, and C3, 3, 4, etc. The higher octave will have a brighter tone, so we can still control that. In fact, one thing I have done here, it's worth showing. I have limited the instrument here. This is the key range for the instrument to C1, which also matches the SH-101. It only went down to C1, and we can go all the way up to C8, but we'll come to that more in the build. yeah, so what do we have? We have, as I say, these controls. We have pulse width. Let's just get the pulse going for a second. Maybe we'll choose a different tone. Something simple. Let's have a look. Let's put a pad on. So we have, let's turn this off. Turn off all the modulation. We have pulse width control here, which we can also modulate here if we activate the LFO. We can also modulate the pulse width. We can modulate the filter. It's kind of rubbery. Tried the best with the information I had to get close to the Roland filter. We'll come to that again in the build as well. Okay, so we have modulation possibilities. Here again we have a compromise. The LFO rate isn't as quick on here. Some of the envelope settings here we can go to, should actually go to 10 here, but I found 13 was a better match. But these in general match 4, 10, 1, and this on the SH-101 would go to 10. But I say playing around and listening to, I think there was a few channels I listened to, automatic gains, where I believe had some good examples of the SH-101. Listen to that and try to get a feel and match the tone of this with that. And yeah, anyway, so I've tried to do the mapping here with a series of constraints that hopefully get us a little bit closer to that SH-101 feel. But I say we'll come to this in the build. Right, what else is there to say then? Yeah, maybe just explain very quickly what we have going on here then. We have, turn this down, turn off the modulation. We have a pulse. We can mix in a saw to open the filter. Turn that off for a second. So we have a pulse wave. We can mix in a saw with this. We can add a sub oscillator. Drop the octave. Down 2. You can filter. Maybe -1. And we get some nice tones. Don't quite get that Roland sound from the resonance, but it's not bad. Okay, I hope that's understandable to everybody. Let's just have a look what's actually going on and how we put this together. This is quite a detailed build, and so please bear with me. It's going to take a little bit of time to do this, and there's a lot of fine settings to try and achieve the result we want. So be a little bit patient. Hopefully I don't make any mistakes because there's quite a lot going on. But here we go. We need to begin with an instrument rack. As always, instrument, and you will find instrument rack here. Just drop that in here. I'll just get rid of my snapshots for a second. So drop the instrument rack in. You'll be presented with something like this, but with macro 1, macro 2. You can expand it here. We'll be using all of the macros. Then we're going to need 2 instances of analog, which will drop in, the first one in here, and then we'll open up down here the chain function. and we'll drop a second instance of analog in here as well. One we'll be using for the sub and the other for the pulse and saw oscillators. Right, so the first thing we want to do is go and click here on the key, and we're going to limit these both here. Well, they usually look like this. We're going to limit these both to C1 to match the SH-101 bass range. Okay, so that's done. We can then hide that. We now need to set up the, we'll actually rename this one here. We'll name this a sub, and this one here we will name as pulse plus triangle, so we know which ones we're dealing with. We'll set up the pulse plus triangle first. So we have the two oscillators here. I activate the noise as well. We'll have the two oscillators plus the noise. From listening to things, I don't know, this is purely from listening to other examples. I had the noise set to 1000. And if I need noise, then I can simply come here and just increase the noise value. So we'll decrease that to -40 to begin with. But if you do need noise, you can just come into the instrument and introduce noise here. That's the same with some other things like a glide or whatever. You could add glide. Just can't control them from the macros, but you could still add them as you wish. Okay, so let's go through this then. We have here this oscillator set to the square, and this oscillator I've left on the triangle. Or saw, sorry. That's just realized my own mistake. That should be saw. We have the saw and the pulse here. So start again. Okay, so we leave this one set to saw, and we have this one set to square. Then we have the filter here. Maybe we'll stay on this one, we'll make some settings here. We have the pulse width, we will map that, so we don't have to make any settings here. I set the sub here at 30%. That's to compensate for the loss of low end when we use resonance on the filter. So that's one setting I made here. Then we can go to, just check my notes here, I think that's everything. Yes, we have the filter now. On the filter we will do a lot of mapping here. I think everything's okay because we will map most of this. In the amp, this will also be mapped as well, so we can work on this a little bit later. The LFO, we can make some settings. LFO1 we need to activate here. And then finally here, if we click here at the very end, we have some settings to make here. We want to make this a mono synth. It's the most important setting here. And I also increase the error here, the error within the instrument for pitch changes and various different things that analog has inside it to add some variation into the tone. So that I set at 10%. These we don't have to worry about. This will map. Okay, so I think we can now go to the second oscillator here. 30% on the sub here as well. We don't use the filter here because we're just going to use the one filter. So I think that's the first instrument setup. Then we can go to our sub here. We will be using here the square wave. Again, we set this here to 30%. Just going to have a look, make sure, I think that's okay for there. The filter we will map, so there's not much we need to do there, in fact nothing we need to do there. The amp we will also map as well, and our LFO We need to activate our LFO here. That's it. Okay, so those are the instruments set up, the bass settings for them. Now we can go to our, one thing we need to do, click here, of course. We need to make this, again, a mono instrument, and we introduce the 10% of error here. So those two are both set up now. So we can go to our mapping. With the mapping, as always, I will leave a screenshot of the settings so that you can jump to the end and put the mappings in if you don't want to watch me go through them all. So the first thing we want to map here then, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated, so we have to be careful. We go to our first instrument and we will map the volume of oscillator 1, which is the pulse. We will map here. We will map the volume of oscillator 2, the saw. We will map here. And then we'll switch to the other instrument and we will map here this sub volume. We will map here. Okay, let's return to the first one now. Then we have here I think the easiest one to set up are the filters and envelope. So we will start on the first instrument. The frequency we can map here, and the resonance we'll map next to it, macro 10. Now we need to do the same for analog sub. So we come here and we map this frequency to here as well, and this resonance as well to this one. Now let's pop back to the pulse plus saw. We will map here our amp envelope. So we have the attack, decay, sustain, and release. So we'll map this one here. Attack, decay, sustain, and release to these. And then we'll do the same for the analog. So actually we can stay on this one because we can go back here from the amp, we can go back to the filter now, and we can map here the filter envelope, which is also the attack. We map that to the same controls for the envelope, decay, sustain, and the release. We'll map those here. Now we can go to the second instrument, the sub again. We'll start with the amp again. We'll map the attack, decay, sustain, and release. And then again to the filter and map the filter envelope, attack, decay, sustain, and our release. Okay, so let's pop back here. So those are done. We have the envelopes mapped. We have the levels for the oscillators mapped. We now need to do the filter envelope, which we find in here. And this is this value, this one here, the frequency modulation. So we map that one here. And we'll do the same for the sub. Go into our filter, envelope, map that here. Right, so those are done. Let's return again to the pulse and saw. We now have to map here VCF modulation. So this is the LFO, and we will go here to VCF filter 1, and we look here for this value, frequency modulation LFO 1. We need to map that here. And again, the same for the sub. Into the filter, map this value here. We also have, let's return to the pulse again, we also have the key tracking, which is this value next to it. We can map that. And again for the sub, map the key tracking. Then we have the VCO pulse width plus modulation. So if we go back to pulse again and we look for our pulse oscillator here, we need the pulse width, which is this value here. So we can map that to our pulse width like that, and we'll also map the LFO here to this as well. And there's a little trick we'll use. We'll map those two here. There's a little trick we'll use in a second. Now we have to make the LFO settings here for our shape and rate. So we stay on pulse plus saw, and we need the rate here, this one here. We're going to map here, and the shape, which if we click here in this box, we'll get the shape. We need to repeat that for the sub. We come to the sub, rate here, map to the rate, and the shape, let's move that over, this one here, we will map here as well. This sub octave will come here on the sub, we'll stay on the sub, and we need to map this control here, the octave, we map to there. Okay, so those are the items we need to map. Now it's really just a case of how we constrain them, and that will set up the instrument correctly, hopefully, and allow us a few tricks specifically with the LFO rate and this VCO pulse width mod, but I'll come to that as we go along. So let's just put the values in. This one here, the VCO pulse width plus mod, I have this set at 102%. Second one I have set to 0 and 1. The VCF mod 0 to 4, both of those. This one here, the VCF keyboard, I have set from 0 to 1. This one is also 0 to 1. The sub oscillator is -40 to 0 decibels, and again to 0 decibels. This one, the sustain, stays at 1. 4 of those. The release I set here to 13. Now, as I say, originally SH-101 had 10, but I've listened to some instruments, and maybe it's tolerances within the machine, but they seem to sustain longer than 10. So I've taken the liberty of setting that to 13. Set it to 10 if you want authenticity. Then this one here, the pulse, -40 to 0. This goes sine noise 2, we can't change that. The LFO rate I've set from 2. Oh, one we need to map, I've forgotten here. We need to map, here this is important, we need to map the LFO here on and off, this control here for the pulse and saw, we need to map that to the LFO rate. And we also need to do the same for the sub. So we take this control here and map that to the LFO rate. So what happens there is we can actually, if you can allows us to turn off the LFO. See, if you can see here, it's turning on and off, and it turns on right up here at 1.4 Hertz at the moment, but with the constraints we will now restrict that, so that I'll show you. This is the little trick here. Let's go here, noise. So the LFO rate I set from 2 to 127. This stays at the same, and this one here I set to 2 as well. And these values here control when this turns on. So if we now look here it's off at the moment, but if we just increase that a little bit on, it literally just moves a little bit. So that allows us to have a position where we turn off the LFO, because actually in analog you can't turn off the LFO. It always has this 0.1 Hertz value, which was a bit frustrating. You couldn't get rid of the 0.1 Hertz, so it would always modulate the pulse width. But with this little trick here, it allows us to modulate, but also turn off the LFO and then adjust pulse width manually and not get the movement of the pulse width. Otherwise we would get this 0.1 Hertz movement. Just a little trick I put in. Okay, let's carry on with our settings then. So this is 0.117. So the filter envelope here, let's have a look. Filter envelope I set from 0 to 7.46. It's a strange number, but as I said, I've got this value from listening to people playing with the SH-101, tweaking around and trying to get a similar sound to what they were doing with their proper instruments. And so I say it's just a value I've tuned. Same for this one here, 0 to 7.46. Then we have the resonance, has a maximum of 87. We have the frequency is 20,000, not 22,000 for the filter. The SH-101 actually goes to a lower frequency here, but we can't adjust this below 30, so we have to accept 30 and have a little compromise. Okay, but anyway, the delay, 10 seconds for all of these. For all the delay values, and the attack is 4 seconds. Maximum attack value is 4 seconds. Oh. And finally our octave, we don't need to go -3 +3, we need to go -2 to 0. And that's it. That is everything set up. Hopefully things work now. We can try this. Let's try some of my snapshots here. There we go. Try another one. And of course we can randomize these values if we want now. To try and find some interesting presets. If you find one you like, you can save it as a new snapshot. We can't save them here. Just turn this down a second, interesting tone. We could in theory save both presets for this and this, find the system, but it's quite complicated, you soon get lost. So I found the best way was to simply just make a preset here, and then you can put plenty of presets in here. Finally, if you click here, we don't need that anymore. If you click here, this will save this into your to user library here under presets, and then instrument racks. That'll be saved there. Okay. Is there anything else to say? Yes. One final thing. I've built this with Ableton Live 12.2, which was recently released. I would recommend using that to not affect compatibility. There shouldn't be an issue, I should imagine, but just to be safe, I will be putting this up on my Patreon with the version 12.2 to make sure we don't have any compatibility issues. Okay, thanks for watching, and Hope this has been useful. Enjoy your day as always. Take care.